A hand clamped over a woman's mouth from behind. A second hand tore her sideways off her feet. Her boots left the porch boards. She kicked. She bit down on the palm and tasted blood, and the man only laughed. A third man came up out of the dust with a coil of rope. They bound her wrists in front of her belly. The belly was big. 8 months big. She tried to scream, and a strip of dirty cloth went between her teeth. They threw her over the saddle of a fourth man's horse. 6 men. 6 horses. They rode west out of the yard at a gallop, and the dust closed behind them like a door. Her name was Sarah May Holloway. She was 23 years old and 3 weeks a widow. Who in this empty country was going to come for her? Stay with me. They rode for half a day. Sarah lost track of time after the first hour. The saddle horn dug into her hip with every stride, and her belly bounced against the leather, and she was certain that the baby was going to come right there, slung over a stranger's horse, in the middle of country that had no roads and no towns and no living thing except sage and rock and the heat coming up off the ground. But the baby held on. That child had Tom's stubbornness. She had thought that before. She thought it again now. When the riders finally pulled up, it was at the base of a long flat mesa, in a hollow nobody would ever find unless they already knew it was there. There was a fire ring already built. There was a brush corral for the horses. There was a lean-to with bedrolls under it. This was no chance camp. These men had used this place before. The leader swung down off his big sorrel horse. He was tall, wide through the shoulders. A black flat-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. A red wool shirt under a long leather duster. He walked over to the horse Sarah was tied across, and he cut the rope that held her, and he caught her under the arms when she slid off so she did not hit the ground belly first. That surprised her. He set her down in the dirt as gentle as a man setting down a bag of eggs. Then he pulled the gag out of her mouth. "You scream," he said, "and I put it back in. You understand?" Sarah did not scream. She could not have, even if she'd wanted to. Her mouth was so dry her tongue felt like a strip of leather. "Water?" she rasped. The leader looked at one of the younger men. "Give her water." The younger man came over with a canteen. He held it to her cracked lips. She drank. She drank until the leader said, "Enough. You'll be sick." She stopped. She sat in the dirt and breathed. The leader crouched down in front of her so his eyes were level with hers. He had pale blue eyes. The pale blue of a winter sky. They were not cruel eyes. They were not kind eyes either. They were the eyes of a man who had decided a long time ago that other people were a problem to be solved. "My name is Cyrus Bell," he said. "I know who you are. You are Sarah May Holloway. You are the daughter of Garrett May. Your daddy owns the biggest stretch of cattle land between here and the Missouri River, and your daddy is going to pay me $10,000 in gold to get you back. You and the baby and you both. You understand me so far?" Sarah nodded once. "Good. Here is what is going to happen. We are going to sit here in this canyon for the next 8 days while a rider takes word to your daddy. In 8 days that rider comes back with the gold. The morning after that, you ride east on your own horse and you go home to your daddy, and you forget you ever saw any of our faces. That is the deal. Are you with me?" She wet her lips. "And if my father will not pay?" Cyrus Bell looked at her a long moment. "Your daddy will pay." He said it like a fact, the way another man might say the sun comes up in the east. Then he stood up and walked away toward the fire, and Sarah May Holloway sat alone in the dirt with her hands tied in front of her belly, and she understood, with a small, clean, awful clarity, that her daddy was not going to pay. Because her daddy had cut her off 2 years ago. Because she had married Tom Holloway against her daddy's will. Tom, who had been nothing but a ranch hand on her daddy's spread, but the kindest, finest, gentlest man she had ever met in her life. Tom, who had built her a little 3-room house on a quarter section of his own bought land. Tom, who was lying buried in a pine box behind that little house, 3 weeks dead from a stray rifle ball during a range dispute that had nothing to do with him. Her daddy had not come to the funeral. Her daddy was not going to pay $10,000 to ransom a daughter he had cut out of his will. Cyrus Bell did not know that yet. When he found out, and he was going to find out, Sarah did not know what he was going to do. But she had a notion. And the notion sat in her chest like a cold stone. She put one bound hand on her belly. The baby kicked slow and hard. "Hold on," she whispered. "Hold on, little one. Mama is thinking." She looked across the camp at the 6 men. Cyrus Bell, the leader. Calculating. A heavy man with a beard, They called him Briggs, already drunk on something from a clay jug. Two brothers, gaunt, mean-faced, identical except one had a scar across the bridge of his nose. The Pruitt brothers. A small wiry old man with white whiskers, sharpening a knife on a stone. He had not spoken once the whole ride. And the youngest, a boy of maybe 19 with two clean cheeks and eyes that kept finding her and sliding away and finding her again. Sarah did not like the way he looked at her. She did not like it at all. She looked away from him. She looked east the way they had come. The country east of here was empty. 200 miles of badlands between this hollow and the nearest town. She had been pulled off the porch of her own little house, the only soul there besides her, and the only living witness was an old yellow dog who would not be able to tell anybody anything. Nobody was coming. She knew it. She accepted it. And in the accepting of it, somewhere down very deep in Sarah May Holloway something hardened. If nobody was coming, then she was going to have to be the one who got out. She did not know how yet. But she set her jaw and she put her hand flat on her belly, and she sat very still in the dirt and she began to watch. She watched everything. She watched how Cyrus Bell counted the horses every time one of his men moved. She watched the youngest one drink, too fast, too eager, trying to look like a man. She watched Briggs nod off against the saddle. She watched the old man with the knife test the edge against a thumb and grunt and put the knife in a sheath on his belt. A woman with her hands tied has only one weapon left. Her eyes. Sarah May Holloway used hers. Somewhere out there, beyond the rim of this hollow, the country went on for hundreds of empty miles. The sun was beginning to drop. The shadow of the mesa stretched out east across the sage. And out in that shadow, though Sarah did not know it yet and the 6 men in the hollow did not know it yet, a single horse was already moving, walking slow, picking its way along an old dry wash, carrying one man. A man who had heard a sound a half-mile back that did not belong in this country. The sound of a woman crying. He pulled the horse up at the lip of the dry wash and he listened. The wind. Sage scraping against itself. A red-tailed hawk somewhere overhead calling once. And under all of that, faint, almost gone, the sound he had heard a quarter-mile back. A woman. Crying. Not loud. The way a woman cries when she has been crying a long time and has nothing left and is trying to hold it in so the men around her won't hear. The rider sat very still on the horse. He was a big man. Not tall but built across the chest and shoulders the way a blacksmith is built. Sunburned dark on the back of his neck and the backs of his hands. A short dark beard. A flat-crowned brown hat pulled low. A long leather coat against the high country cold of evening. On his hip, a single Colt revolver, the grip worn smooth from 40 years of his own palm. He did not look like much. A man going by him in a town would have noticed him for one heartbeat and then forgotten him. Which was the way the rider preferred it. His name was Eli Crow. He had been riding south for 2 weeks, going nowhere in particular, the way he had been going nowhere in particular for the last 11 years. Since the war. Since the things in the war that he did not talk about and would not talk about and would never talk about, not to anyone, not even on the night he died, whenever that was going to be. Eli Crow knew the sound of a woman in trouble. He had heard it before. In Tennessee. In Missouri. In a town in Kansas where he had once walked into a saloon and walked out again 10 minutes later and 3 men had not walked out at all. He did not seek that sound. But when it came to him he answered it. That was the only rule Eli Crow had left. He dismounted. He led the horse off the trail and tied it to a piece of sage in a low draw where it would not be seen against the skyline. He took the rifle out of the scabbard. He levered around into the chamber and let the hammer down to half-cock. He slid the Colt out of the holster and checked the loads in all 6 chambers. Most men carried 5 and rode an empty under the hammer, but Eli Crow had stopped carrying empty chambers a long time ago. He walked up the wash on his own boots. Quiet. Pausing every dozen steps to listen. The crying came again. Closer now. From over the next rise, where the wash opened out into a hollow under the mesa. Eli Crow went down on his belly and he crawled the last 20 yards on his elbows, and he came to the lip of the rise and he looked down. He counted in his head before he counted out loud. 6 men. 1 woman. The woman was sitting in the dirt with her hands tied in front of her. She was 8 months pregnant. Her dress was torn at one shoulder. Her face was streaked with dirt and dried tears. She was looking down at her belly and her lips were moving and Eli was too far away to hear, but he had seen women do that before and he knew what she was doing. She was talking to her baby. Eli Crow's jaw set. The 6 men were spread out around the camp. The leader by the fire watching the country. A drunk against a saddle. 2 thin men playing cards on a flat rock. An old man honing a knife. A young one, too young, circling the woman every few minutes and trying not to look like he was circling her. Eli Crow took all of that in inside of 10 seconds. Then he backed off the rise on his elbows the same way he had come up. Slow. Patient. Not raising any dust against the sky. When he was back in the wash, he sat down with his back against the sandy bank and he thought. A young man would have ridden straight in. A young man would have come over that rise yelling with the rifle up, and a young man would have gotten the woman killed inside of 3 seconds. Eli Crow was not a young man. He thought about the country, the light, the wind, the horses, the way the camp was laid out. He thought about the fact that there was a woman down there carrying a child, and there was a young outlaw circling her, and the leader of those men had only so much control over what his men did when the whiskey jug went around a 3rd time. The sun was an hour from the western rim. In an hour, the sun would be directly behind a rider coming in from the east, putting the rider in silhouette and putting the sun straight into the eyes of any man looking up at him. In an hour, the drunk would be drunker. In an hour, the woman would have been a captive of those 6 men for 1 more hour, and Eli Crow was not going to give them more than that. He stood up. He went back to his horse. He pulled a small leather pouch out of his saddlebag, old, soft, worn, and he opened it and he took out a single object. A silver sheriff's star. Not his. He had carried it for 11 years. He did not wear it. He did not have the right. But he carried it. He pinned it on the inside of his coat. Not on the outside. On the inside. Against the place over his heart. He mounted the horse. He turned the horse west. He rode slow. Walking pace. Letting the horse pick its own steps so there was no clatter, no sudden noise. He came up the wash. He came over the rise. He came down the long slope into the hollow with the sun directly behind him. The first man to see him was the old man with the knife. The old man stood up slow. He did not call out. He just watched. The way one old wolf watches another old wolf cross his territory. The second to see him was Cyrus Bell. Cyrus Bell stood up from the fire and put one hand on the butt of his pistol and watched Eli Crow ride in. The other 4 men noticed in a ragged sequence. The drunk picked his head up off the saddle. The card-playing brothers stopped playing. The young one stopped circling the woman and turned and went very still. Eli Crow rode his horse to within 30 feet of the fire. He pulled up. He did not draw a weapon. He did not raise his voice. He sat his horse with his hands flat on the saddle horn in plain view, and he looked at Cyrus Bell with the sun at his back, and he spoke once. "Evening, gentlemen." Cyrus Bell did not return the greeting. Eli Crow glanced past him, calm like a man stopping for water. His eyes went to the woman. He took her in for 1 full second. Then he looked back at Cyrus Bell. "That your wife?" Eli asked. "No." "Sister?" "No." "Daughter?" "No." Eli Crow nodded slowly. The way a man nods when something he already suspected has just been confirmed. "Then I expect," Eli said, "you'll have no objection if I take her with me." Cyrus Bell laughed. It was a short laugh. Not a real one. "Friend," Cyrus said, "I do not know who you are or where you came from, but you are 1 man and we are 6. So I am going to be polite and tell you one time. Get back on your horse. Ride back the way you came. Do not stop until the sun comes up tomorrow. Do that and you live to ride somewhere else." Eli Crow looked at him. Then Eli Crow smiled. Just a little. Just at the corner of his mouth. "Mister," Eli said, "I have been 1 man against 6 before." The hollow went very quiet. Sarah May Holloway, sitting in the dirt with her hands tied, was watching this with her mouth slightly open and her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. A second ago she had been certain she was alone in the world. Now there was a stranger on a horse at the lip of her grave, and the stranger had just smiled at the man who put her there, and somewhere in Sarah's tired, battered chest a small wild thing she thought she had lost forever. Hope opened one eye. For a long second the hollow held. Then Cyrus Bell sat back down by the fire and picked up his coffee cup like nothing had been said. "Suit yourself," he said. "Mind if we finish our supper before we kill you?" Eli Crow nodded once. "Take your time." He stepped down off his horse. And the second his boots hit the dirt, every man in that hollow knew the way an animal knows, that the next minute and a half of their lives was the most important minute and a half they were ever going to have. And not all of them were going to make it through to the other side. Cyrus Bell went for his pistol. Of course he did. He was not the kind of man who finished his coffee. The coffee cup was a feint. The coffee cup was meant to make Eli relax. And the second Eli's boots were on the ground and his hands were a half-second further from his gun belt than they had been a moment before, Cyrus Bell drew. He was fast. He was not fast enough. Eli Crow shot him through the meat of the right shoulder before Cyrus Bell's barrel was clear of the holster. The shot rolled across the hollow and bounced off the mesa wall and came back doubled. Cyrus Bell hit the dirt on his back. His pistol fell out of his hand. His face went white. He did not die. Eli had not shot to kill him. Eli had shot to take his gun arm because Eli wanted Cyrus Bell alive a little longer, and because a leader on the ground holding his shoulder is more useful to a man trying to end a fight quickly than a leader who is dead. The other 5 men reacted at different speeds. The drunk reacted not at all. He was still trying to focus his eyes. The young one, the boy who had been circling Sarah, froze. His hand was on his pistol and it stayed on his pistol and he did not pull it. His mouth was open. The 2 card-playing brothers came up off the rock with their guns rising. One on Eli's left. One on Eli's right. The old man with the knife did the most dangerous thing in the whole hollow, which was nothing at all. He just watched. Waiting. Eli Crow was already moving. He put his second shot through the left-hand brother before the brother got level. Center chest. The man went down hard and did not get up. The right-hand brother fired. The bullet went past Eli's ear close enough to lift his hair. Eli put his third shot into that brother's gun hand deliberately, and the pistol jumped out of the brother's fingers and the brother screamed and grabbed his ruined hand against his belly and went down on his knees. 3 shots. 2 men down. 1 leader bleeding. 5 seconds had passed. Briggs the drunk had finally figured out what was happening. He was clawing for the pistol on his hip. Eli took 2 long strides toward him and brought the barrel of his own Colt down across the side of Briggs's head, and Briggs dropped sideways into the dirt and did not move. That was 4 men handled in 8 seconds. The young one had not moved. His hand was still on his pistol. His mouth was still open. His eyes had gone from Sarah to Eli to Cyrus on the ground to the brother choking out his last breath on the rock. And the boy did the smartest thing he had ever done in his short and badly spent life. He let go of the pistol. He raised his hands up over his head as high as they would go. "Don't shoot me, mister," he said. "Don't shoot me. I am 19. I am 19. Please." Eli Crow looked at him for one long moment. The Colt did not move. "On your knees," Eli said. "Hands behind your head. Stay there." The boy obeyed so fast he almost fell over doing it. That left 1 man. The old man with the knife. The old man had not drawn a gun. The old man did not, as it turned out, carry a gun. The old man had a knife in his belt and a long thin sticker tucked up his sleeve, and the old man was, by a long mile, the most dangerous man in this hollow, and Eli Crow had known that the second he had laid down on the rim and looked into the camp. The old man was standing very still by the lean-to with his hands held loose at his sides. "You're the one I was worried about," Eli said. The old man nodded once. "Reckon I am. You don't have to do this." "Reckon I do." The old man came at him. He came faster than a man that old had any right to move. The sticker was out of his sleeve and into his hand and crossing the space between them, and Eli Crow had a moment, a very small moment, where he understood that the old man might in fact be the man who finally finished him. Eli stepped sideways and fired. The shot took the old man through the ribs at 3 feet. The old man went down on 1 knee. He did not drop the sticker. He looked up at Eli with eyes that were not afraid. He was breathing hard. "That was a good shot," the old man said. "Was meant to be." The old man tried to lift the sticker. Eli Crow shot him a second time. The old man went the rest of the way down. The hollow went quiet. 90 seconds had passed. Maybe less. Eli Crow stood in the middle of that hollow with his Colt out and the smoke curling off the barrel and his ears ringing and his hand as steady as it had been the second he stepped off the horse. 3 men dead. 1 unconscious. 1 bleeding on his back. 1 on his knees with his hands up crying. Eli Crow holstered the Colt. He turned slowly in a circle, scanning the way you do because in a fight you are never sure until you have counted twice. He counted twice. Then he walked across the hollow to Sarah May Holloway, and he knelt down in front of her, and he pulled a folding knife out of his pocket and he cut the rope between her wrists in one stroke. She stared at him. Her hands came up between them. The rope dropped to the dirt. "Ma'am," Eli said, "are you hurt?" She could not speak. She could only shake her head. "The baby?" She put both her freed hands on her belly. She felt for him. He moved sharp against her palm. "He's all right," she whispered. "He is all right." Eli Crow nodded. He stood up. He held out one big hand. She took it. He pulled her gently to her feet. "And listen, if you're still here with me riding down into this hollow with Eli Crow and Sarah May and the smoke and the dust and the dead, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button. Because what Eli Crow does next after the gunfire stops is the part of this story I want you here for. Now stay with me. We are not finished." Eli Crow walked back across the hollow to where Cyrus Bell was lying on his back in the dirt. Cyrus was awake. He was holding his right shoulder with his left hand and the blood was coming through his fingers and his face was the color of old paper. But he was awake. Eli crouched down beside him. "Mr. Bell," Eli said, "I'm going to ask you some questions. You are going to answer them. If you lie to me even once, I'm going to leave you out here for the buzzards. Are we clear?" Cyrus Bell looked up at him. "Who are you?" he asked. "Doesn't matter. You moved like a peace officer. Used to be. Where? Doesn't matter." Cyrus Bell closed his eyes a moment. When he opened them again they were calmer. "Ask your questions. How many of you knew about this job?" 6. "The 6 in this camp. Who hired you?" "Nobody hired us. I picked her. I picked her father." "Why her?" "Her father has money. Her father has no other children. I figured he'd pay." Eli Crow looked at the woman who was standing a few feet behind him with both hands on her belly. "Ma'am?" Eli said without turning. "Is that true about your father?" Sarah May Holloway swallowed. "He has money," she said. "But he cut me off 2 years ago. He would not have paid." Mr. Bell did not know that. Eli Crow looked back down at Cyrus Bell. "Hear that?" Cyrus did not answer. "Means you killed 3 of your own men over a payday that was never coming." Cyrus closed his eyes again. Eli stood up. He walked to the brother with the ruined hand. He bound the hand with strips of the brother's own shirt, businesslike, like a man dressing a calf's leg. The brother was crying and shaking and Eli ignored that. He bound the wound. He tied the brother's good wrist to a post of the lean-to. He did the same to the boy. Then he came back and bound up Cyrus Bell's shoulder and tied Cyrus's good arm to the same post. He left the drunk where he lay. When all of it was done, Eli Crow walked over to where Sarah May Holloway was standing. "Ma'am," he said, "can you ride?" "Yes." "How far?" She thought about it. "I do not know. With a baby. Maybe 20 miles in a day. Maybe less. 20 miles will do." "Where are you taking me?" He looked at her. For the first time since he had ridden into the hollow, his face softened. "Not much. Just at the corners. The way a stone softens when water has been working on it a long time. Wherever you ask, ma'am." Her breath caught. Because nobody, not since Tom, had asked her where she wanted to go. Her daddy had told her. The men in this hollow had told her. The world had told her. Nobody had asked. She did not answer right away. She walked a few steps away from Eli and stood with her hand on her belly and she looked at the sky, which was starting to go pink in the west. She thought about the little 3-room house behind the pine box that held her husband. She thought about how she could not go back to that house alone. Not 8 months gone. Not with a baby coming. She thought about her daddy's big white house 200 miles east, with its iron gates and its silver candlesticks and the door that had been shut to her for 2 years. She thought about all the country in between. She turned back to Eli Crow. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I do not have anywhere to go, mister. My husband is 3 weeks dead and my daddy will not have me. I do not know where to ask you to take me." Eli Crow looked at her a long moment. Then he said something he had not planned to say. Something that surprised him even as it was coming out of his mouth. "There is a town," he said. 2 days northeast of here. Quiet place. Got a doctor. Got a midwife I know. Got a boarding house run by a widow lady who would take you in for a few months and not ask questions. I can get you that far. After the baby comes, wherever you want to go in this world, ma'am, I can get you that far too. If you want me to." Sarah May Holloway looked at him. She looked at him a long time. "Why?" she asked. "Soft. Why would you do that?" Eli Crow shifted his weight. He looked at his boots. He looked back up at her. "My wife died in childbirth," he said. 11 years ago. I was on the other side of a war. I was not there. I have spent 11 years riding around this country because I could not stand to be in any one place too long. And ma'am, I came over that rise tonight and I saw you down there with your hands tied and your belly out to here, and I thought about my wife dying alone in a back bedroom with nobody to hold her hand, and I thought maybe God was giving me a chance to do for somebody else what I never got to do for her." He stopped. He looked away, across the hollow, at nothing. "That is why, ma'am." Sarah May Holloway began to cry. Not the broken crying of the woman in the dirt with her hands tied. The other kind. The kind a person cries when, after a long time, somebody finally treats them gently. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "Mister," she said. "What is your name?" "Crow." "Eli Crow." "Mr. Crow. I would be grateful. I would be very grateful." Eli Crow nodded once. "All right then," he said. "Let's go." He went and gathered the best 2 horses out of the outlaw string. He saddled them. He filled 2 canteens at the camp's water barrel. He took a roll of biscuits and a side of bacon out of the camp stores. He took the rifle and ammunition he found in the saddlebags of the dead men. He left enough water and enough food at the post where the 3 survivors were tied that they would be alive when a posse came back through to pick them up. Then he wrote a single line on a folded piece of paper, in pencil, in a small careful hand. He pinned the paper to Cyrus Bell's chest with a piece of straw. The line read, "A federal marshal will be by within the week. Live or die as you choose." "You see." Sarah May read it over his shoulder. "You are a marshal?" she whispered. Eli Crow gave her a small tired smile. "Used to be. You said you used to be a peace officer." "Same thing. Different word." "Are you really going to send a marshal?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why didn't you just take them in yourself?" Eli Crow lifted her gently into the saddle. He set her right. He put the reins in her hands. "Because, ma'am," he said, "I have a woman and a baby to look after. And there is only so much one man can do in a day." He swung up onto his own horse. He turned the horse east. And the 2 of them, the silent scarred man on the bay horse and the 8 months pregnant widow on the borrowed gray, rode out of that hollow as the sun went down behind the mesa and the first stars came out in the deepening blue overhead. Behind them, 3 living men were tied to a post. 3 dead men lay where they had fallen. And ahead of them, somewhere in the soft purple distance of the Badlands, was a town with a doctor and a midwife and a widow lady who would take in a stranger and not ask questions. Sarah May Holloway rode beside Eli Crow for a long time without speaking. When she finally spoke, it was very quiet. "Mr. Crow." "Ma'am?" "I'm going to name this baby. When he comes. I'm going to name him after his daddy. Tom." "Tom Holloway. That's a fine name, ma'am. But for his middle name, if it is all right with you, I am going to name him Eli." Eli Crow rode a long stretch before he answered. When he did, his voice was a little rougher than it had been. "Ma'am," he said, "that would be all right with me. That would be very all right with me." And they rode on into the dusk. The town was called Mercy Springs. It was small. A main street 4 buildings long. A church with a white steeple at one end and a livery at the other. A doctor in a clapboard house with green shutters. A widow lady named Mrs. Hannity who ran a boarding house with 6 bedrooms and lace curtains and a vegetable garden out back. Eli Crow brought Sarah May Holloway in 2 days after the hollow. He paid Mrs. Hannity for 3 months' board out of a small leather poke he carried in his saddlebag. He did not say what was in the poke. He did not say where the money had come from. Mrs. Hannity, who had been a widow long enough to know when not to ask questions, did not ask any. Sarah May was put in the front bedroom upstairs. The room had a window that looked out over the church and the meadow beyond. There was a quilt on the bed. There was a pitcher of cold water on the washstand. There was, for the first time in 3 weeks, a roof over Sarah May Holloway's head that did not belong to dead people. She sat down on the edge of the bed and she cried. Eli Crow waited downstairs in the parlor with his hat in his hands. When Sarah had washed her face and come back down, Eli stood up. "Ma'am," he said, "there is a marshal 4 days east of here. I am going to ride for him in the morning. I will tell him about the men in the hollow. I will tell him you were taken and that you are safe. Your daddy, If he wishes to be told you are alive, I will have the marshal send him word. Or I will not. That part is up to you. Sarah May thought about it. Tell him, she said finally. Tell him I am alive. Tell him where I am. He can come or not come. That is up to him. Eli Crow nodded. And Mr. Crow, ma'am, after you have done all that, will you come back? He looked at her. For a moment he did not answer. Then he said, yes, ma'am. If you want me to, I will come back. I want you to. All right then. He put his hat on his head. He touched the brim once. He walked out of the parlor and out of Mrs. Hannity's front door and out to his horse, and he swung up into the saddle, and he rode east out of Mercy Springs in the early morning light. He was back in 12 days. In the 12 days he was gone, the baby came. It came on a Tuesday morning in the front bedroom of Mrs. Hannity's boarding house, with the doctor on one side of the bed and the midwife on the other and Mrs. Hannity holding Sarah May's hand. It came hard. But it came and it lived and it was a boy, and Sarah May Holloway, sweat-soaked and shaking and laughing through her tears, held her son against her chest for the first time and counted his fingers and counted his toes and put her face down against the top of his small warm head. Tom, she whispered. Tom Eli Holloway. Welcome to the world. When Eli Crow rode back into Mercy Springs the following Monday afternoon, the first thing he did was tie up his horse outside Mrs. Hannity's, and the second thing he did was take off his hat at the door, and the third thing he did was follow Mrs. Hannity up the stairs to the front bedroom where Sarah May was sitting up in bed with the baby asleep against her shoulder. She looked up when he came in. She smiled. A small tired private smile just for him. Mr. Crow, she said softly. Come and meet your namesake. Eli Crow crossed the room very slowly, the way a man crosses a room when he is afraid the floor is going to give out from under him. He sat down in the chair beside the bed. He took off his hat and held it in his lap. Sarah May shifted the baby off her shoulder and turned him so Eli could see his face. The baby was small. He was pink. He had a fist of dark hair on the top of his head and his small mouth was open in sleep. Eli Crow looked at him for a long time. Ma'am, he said. His voice was not quite steady. He is a fine boy. He is a very fine boy. Would you like to hold him? Eli looked at his big rough hands. I am afraid I would break him. You won't break him. You have held a baby before. Not for a long time. Then it is time. She put the baby into Eli Crow's arms. He took the small bundle as carefully as a man takes a sleeping bird off a fence post. The baby fit in the crook of his elbow like he had been built to fit there. The baby did not wake. He made a small soft sigh and turned his face into Eli's coat. Eli Crow looked down at the boy. 11 years of riding around the country going nowhere in particular, 11 years of empty trails and empty rooms and empty beds, 11 years of carrying a silver star against his heart that he did not feel he had the right to wear, all of it landed on him at once in that quiet upstairs bedroom, and Eli Crow, who had not cried since the morning they buried his wife, felt one slow tear go down the side of his nose and land on the blanket the baby was wrapped in. He did not wipe it away. He did not move. After a long moment he looked up at Sarah May Holloway. Ma'am, he said. Yes, Mr. Crow. I am too old for you. I have been alone too long. I have done things in my life that I would not ask any woman to share. So I am not going to ask you what I would like to ask you. Not now. Maybe not ever. Sarah May waited. But I would like, if you would allow it, to stay around this town for a while. I would like to be near you and the boy. I would like to be useful. I could maybe sheriff this place. There is no peace officer here. The town has been asking. I have the experience. I would like to stay where I can see you, ma'am. Where I can see him. If that is all right with you. Sarah May Holloway looked at the big quiet man with her son asleep in his arms. Mr. Crow, she said. Ma'am. You stay as long as you want. You are welcome here as long as I am here. And if a day comes, sometime down the road, when you would like to ask me what you said you were not going to ask me. You ask me. Eli Crow looked at her. His mouth worked once, twice. He did not speak. He just nodded. The baby stirred in his arms. Made a small sound. Settled again. Outside the window, somewhere in the meadow, a meadowlark called once. The afternoon sun came in through the lace curtains and fell across the bed and across the man in the chair and across the baby in his arms and across the quiet smiling woman watching them both. And so it was in a small clapboard town called Mercy Springs that Sarah May Holloway began the second half of her life, and Eli Crow, who had given up on ever having a first half worth keeping, was given a second one anyway. He pinned the silver star on the outside of his coat the next morning. He had finally earned the right to wear it. The baby grew. The town grew. And the man and the woman and the boy, 3 people the world had nearly thrown away, grew into something new together, in a quiet corner of a country that was beginning to forget the kind of trouble that had brought them together in the first place. Out in the Badlands, in the hollow under the mesa, the wind blew across an empty fire ring. And 6 men were never seen in that country again. The end.